Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, and wherever you're at, we welcome you to the Live from the Heartland show here on YouTube. New episodes air every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time with individual interviews posted throughout the following week. I'm your host, Michael James, encouraging you to take the chain from the brain to get back in the people's game, because it's time to move from the lower level to the higher, from the shallower to the deeper, from the one-sided to the many, and from the abstract to the concrete. So without further ado, let's get it on. Welcome all you citizens of the world. It's time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. I'm Michael James. I'm here in Chicago in the 49th Ward. We are a very blue place and we are grateful for that. Today we're going to have two good guests. Both of them have been on the show before. We're going to have the independent political consultant, Don Rose, and giving us his view on things that are going on. And then we're going to have Professor Euan Hague from DePaul University talking about DEI and how that affects campuses here in Illinois and beyond. It's a busy week. There's a lot of news, lots going on. A lot of folks are concerned about the direction of things. A lot of people are in the streets. A lot of people are demonstrating. Lawyers are in court. It's going to be a pretty intense next few years. And I think that the guests we have on today will give our listeners, our viewers, some insight into what's going on and how they might approach things. So with all that said, we're going to take a musical break and we will be back with our first guest in just a moment. So stay tuned here on the left end of your dial or however you're getting the show today. Be right back.
Child that's grown old. If dreams were lightning, thunder were desire, this old house would have burnt down a long time ago. Make me an angel that flies from Montgomery. Make me a poster of an old just give me one thing that I can hold on to.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of March 14th. I'm Michael James. I'm still up here in the 49th Ward in Chicago where it's still real blue. And I'm really happy to bring on our first guest, someone who has been around a long time and has been very helpful for me to understand things over time. He's a veteran Chicago journalist, independent political consultant who comes on Live from the Heartland monthly these days, Don Rose. And hello to you, Don.
How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you. There's a lot to talk about. I got a long list from Ukraine, Middle East, tariffs, the crashing of our economy, town hall meetings, the Republicans rooting for Russia. Anyhow, how about you start off with a little bit on the crashing of our economy?
This is due, as I think many of your listeners, viewers will know, is due to primarily the imposition of all these tariffs. And tariffs wind up being a tax on the people who live here. It does not punish the country that the tariffs are imposed on. They get that covered, but it winds up, as I say, being a tax on the people here in the States who have to buy some of these products. Now, that becomes a problem And when it's coupled with the firings that are going on that are soon to make an impact on our numbers. We've had tens of thousands of people fired, and they're facing the search for jobs, and there are not enough jobs as yet. And so you're creating more unemployment at the same time as you are creating an inflationary situation. Now, Wall Street has responded to this, as one can expect, with a series of serious dives. Now, the biggest problem here, for a long, long time, people believe that Trump talked tariffs to use as a negotiating tool. And we have been getting more and more evidence that he really believes in these tariffs. And he virtually has acknowledged that they can lead to a recession, but then he promises after that brief whatever recession is over. Now, he may deny now that he said he is expecting a recession. I think he's using a term like an interruption or a disturbance or whatever. But we seem to be heading in the direction of a recession. And we're all losing money at the same time. And nearly half the people in the United States are connected to the stock market one way or another, through their pension programs, their 401ks, or their IRAs, even, the people in the lower middle income. So everybody is getting poorer with these drops that we've seen, and there is no sign as yet that he might change his mind. He's gone back and forth on a couple of special ones, but he still seems intent on destroying Canada's economy along with ours, so that it will be easier for him to, quote, annex Canada, or however he plans to get Canada. He is talking expansionism. The Greenland thing keeps rearing its ugly head. The people in Greenland certainly don't want to be ruled by the United States, especially under Trump, any more than they want to continue ruling by Denmark. So we're getting a horrendous situation with this economic problem interlocked with a growing international problem. They are linked in many ways, and one plays off the other and makes it worse. So we have a very gloomy outlook. The only positive thing one can say about this is that most of the actions that Trump is taking here are very unpopular with his own base. So it's a race in time to the next midterms, which are about, 19 months away, approximately. 18, 19 months away. And if he has not wrought too much damage, it gives us an optimistic situation for those midterms, where there are some, 17 or 18 congressional districts that would seem very vulnerable to turning back to the Democrats. And if we're able to recapture the House at those midterms, then we can stop a great deal of the damage.
People are in the streets, and the courts seem to be deciding against Trump in some of these cases. I think my question is, do you think the courts will hold? Do you think that they'll continue to give what we might consider reasonable opinions? And do you think that Trump and his cronies will permit or follow the instructions of the court?
Well, I think we will get favorable rulings on certain big things like citizenship at birth in the United States. I don't think they're going to go along with his overthrowing that aspect of the Constitution. And on some of the others, these two people who make the difference, Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, are not liberals by any means. They do seem to have some level of conscience, and so I think we'll get on the big issues, as I say, such as citizenship, birth. We should get good ones. Now, this idea of whether or not he follows the edict of the court is something that is so untried and untested that nobody really knows. This guy could decide that there is his own primacy, and we have a constitutional crisis, which has become one of the watchwords of our society these days. We're always on the brink of a constitutional crisis with Donald Trump, and my guess is that he'll have to back off a little bit on these. That he is not going to. Much as he criticizes the new majority of the Supreme Court or the occasional
once in a while
progressive majority, that I don't think he's going to overthrow that or try to act without it. But we'll soon see. He's under a couple of court edicts now, and the next month will probably tell us whether he is about to try to supersede a court ruling.
We do have a couple of elections to watch. In Wisconsin, there's a Supreme Court race, which I guess they elect their Supreme Court candidates up there.
Yes.
And it is a retiring liberal, and there is a liberal type running. I'm wondering what your take on that is. And then there's also, I think, one congressional race going to come up in New York and two in Florida. Any chance of any of those going in what we would call, with a progressive outlook, a good direction?
Well, I can't say I'm confident, but I do think that we will do very well in the Wisconsin situation with the Supreme Court. The last time such a test came, it was overwhelming. It wasn't a narrow call. It was one of the strongest votes for a progressive that the state has seen. Very, very wide margin. I see no reason. Of course, it's always a danger. So when I say I see no reason, that's from this sitting in Chicago perspective. I think she's going to be all right. But one never knows. You have to allow for all sorts of swings. But Ben Wickler, the chairman of the party there, has got a pretty good record of dealing with these statewide elections, even though he lost the presidential, but that was a much more complicated situation. The Florida races, I'm not optimistic about. These are replacing strong Republicans. The districts themselves are strongly Republican. If we see them flipped, that would be a wonderful sign, but I can't say that I see that. I'm more optimistic about New York.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a little bit about Republicans. So far, I haven't seen anyone really shift on anything. We would say they are chicken. I'm not sure if I can say the rest of that word. They've been cruel, kind of two-faced, racist, sexist, and they brought our mayor as well as other sanctuary city mayors into speak before Congress. How did you think Brandon Johnson, the Chicago mayor, the Boston mayor, how they did, and what might be a good tack for Democrats in the Congress and beyond to take in opposition to the Republicans?
Well, there's no doubt that the Democratic Party has to keep up its opposition to almost everything they're proposing. I think that the mayors held their own, including Brandon Johnson. I thought that this was the best kind of setting for him because he can be a good talker. That's what helped him get elected. He came out of nowhere and seemed to have won a lot of the debates or performed well enough in the debates to move him upward very rapidly in that mayoral election. So this was the best situation for him. And depending on who's looking at it, he either held his own or did well. And so, of course, some of the mayors from the other cities, I think, did even better. But we held up well in this assault on the concept of sanctuary cities. So I think the worldview has not changed dramatically on it. There are people who still support us and other sanctuary cities, and there are those who are going to oppose it. But I think the interrogations, which the Republicans hope to discredit the concept, I think they failed to do that.
Any sense of what is really going out there in the hinterlands? We hear a lot of reports that the Republicans have, the Republican leadership are telling their people, their congressional reps, not to have town meetings. And we know that Bernie Sanders and a number of other Democrats are going around and trying to fill in and actually fan the flames of resistance. Any sense about what that says about the Republican Party and their electorate?
Well, I think there is no question that the Trumpism, the MAGA people, are losing their grip on a number of issues. Just look at the free fall of the stock market, among other things, and Trump's making a lot of points that are hurting now or will hurt his Republican base. So that we know, and things are, the polling on those issues, even though we're only, a month and a half into his term, would seem to me that he's losing his grip. And that's reflected in the balking of many of these town hall meetings that Republicans are getting booed at. So I think that's what's going out there, and I don't see him reversing course because he, as I said earlier, honestly believes some of these horrendous things he's talking about. I'm still concerned, largely concerned about how he has sold out the Ukraine. And I think that's even an unpopular thing here, although there is a MAGA base that seems to like Putin, but what Trump is doing now through Rubio is forcing Ukraine to to put all its negotiating points on the table and admit them, which is, Trump says you don't have any cards, and he's making him play what cards they have, which are going to destroy any negotiations. So he's setting them up to lose and switching sides dramatically, which is hurting us, in addition to hurting us internationally for this horrendous idea of switching sides. So these things are working against him, but as I say, it's a race in time before the public is ready to reject enough congressmen at the midterms, which is 18 months away.
Let me ask you about, I watch the news and I saw the new premier in Canada from the Liberal Party, whether you'll win the election or not. But they've been very forceful in standing up to Trump. The kind of strange mayor of in Ontario. Ford Otto, yeah. Yeah, he put 25% tariffs on gas or electricity going into Michigan and a few other places, and then he took it back. I'm just wondering how we support Mexico and Canada. The president of Mexico, Sheinbaum, I think she's been really strong. There were thousands and thousands of people in the streets in Mexico in support of her. And I'm just wondering what people in the United States might do to kind of push against Trump in the economic realm by supporting our neighbors to the north and south.
Well, we've got two different setups there. The Mexican situation seems to be reaching a stasis. The president is cooperating to an extent. She's sending troops to the border. The border crossings are slowing down. So he is not focusing on her as much as these ridiculous efforts in Canada. The Canada does not know what he wants them to do. There are so few border crossings. The amount of fentanyl that's coming across the northern border is so slight, and it's probably coming across through Americans who are going back and forth. So Canada is kind of baffled here and concerned about what's going to happen to its economy. We have to think about whether Trump will go so far as to use any military force in his effort to wreck Canada. Consider, what that might be. That's attacking another NATO country. What would Great Britain do, which is still related to Canada? We've got all these questions up in the air, and even if we start resolving them, those still work at upsetting the market, so the market continues to decline. We've got this it's really interconnected, and like as Nixon once said, I'm adopting a madcap style so nobody will know what to expect. Trump is permanently in a madcap style and keeps giving us different approaches to Canada. First, we're going to impose these tariffs for reason A and then for reason B, and both reasons are provably wrong. It's a confounding situation. I used to think I had all the answers, but I somehow can't come up with one.
Well, we don't expect you to have all the answers, but you certainly give us some insight into these issues. I have a whole lot more questions, but we've run out of time. So I'm inviting you back next month. If you want to come, you're always a great guest. And I look forward to reading your column, which people can get a hold of you at Don Road 65 at AOL.com if people want to reach you and get your weekly newsletter. The last one was about literature. And we didn't get to talk about that, but we'll see you soon, Don. And thanks so much for coming on.
Always a pleasure.
Right on. And everyone else, stay tuned. We'll be right back with our next guest. We're going to talk a little bit more about the impact Trump is having on the people in this country and beyond. We're going to focus on DEI with Euan Hague from DePaul University. Be right back.
Get up, stand up. Oh, stand up for your right. Lord, Lord. Get up, stand up. In the morning, stand up for your right. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your life. Stand up for your right. Stand up for your life. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your life. Don't give up the fight. I say, preacher man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth. You don't know what life is really worth. Isn't all that glitter is gold? Half the story had never been told. So now you see the light. Hey, you stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, Lord, Lord.
Okay, all you citizens of the world, it's time for the second segment of Live from the Heartland for the week of March 14th. We are recording it a couple days early, and our next guest is someone who we've had on the show a few times, and I've been honored to teach a class with him for the last 10 years at DePaul University, so I've gotten to see him a lot. And I think that you all will enjoy our next guest, the one and only Euan Hague, professor of geography and the director of the School of Public Service at the great University of DePaul. Hello to you, Euan. It's always good to see you.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, last time we got together, because we both lived pretty close to each other, you had been, you and a lot of other people at DePaul had received a letter from somebody named Craig Trainer, the acting assistant secretary for Civil Rights, Department of Education. It was actually on Valentine's Day. Now, what was that letter all about? Because we want to talk about DEI, we want to talk about. So right. What do you have in that letter that made everybody a little bit nuts?
Well, this wasn't a letter directly to us as faculty, but it was written by the Trump administration, and it's kind of circulated through higher education. So it wasn't specifically to DePaul or to me personally, but it's a letter that we were all talking about. It kind of came out on the evening of Valentine's Day. So the next Monday morning, because Valentine's Day, if you remember, was a Friday, the next Monday morning, this was all the discussion on campus. And this is one of the many, it's not, obviously, it's one of the many things that the Trump administration has done to really put, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in its crosshairs. I'll just read a little bit of the letter. Federal law thus prohibits covered entities from using race in decisions pertaining to admissions, hiring, promotion, compensation, financial aid, scholarships, prizes, administrative support, discipline, housing, graduation ceremonies, and all other aspects of student, academic, and campus life. Put simply, educational institutions may neither separate or segregate students based on race, nor distribute benefits or burdens based on race. And so that's the language that was in this letter that came out of the Department of Education. And the threat continued. The department intends to take appropriate measures to assess compliance with the applicable statutes and regulations based on the understanding embodied in this letter, beginning no later than 14 days from today's date, including anti-discrimination requirements that are conditioned of receiving federal funding. So the threat really in this letter from the Trump administration was to cut off federal funding for academic institutions if race is taken into account in any of that list of things. And so this letter generated on our campus at DePaul University more questions than answers. And I think it was, people were like, does my course in African studies fall under this letter? Does our Black Student Association fall under this letter? We have at DePaul University, we have cultural resource rooms. So we have a room which is designated as cultural resources, for example, for the Latino students or the LGBTQ students. Do they fall under this letter? What about a scholarship that is particularly for a Hispanic student body or something like that? So there was this raised a lot of questions, and I don't know what our administration has done. We did have, soon after this letter was made public, and again, this went around all academic institutions in the United States, not just DePaul. So we're all kind of, whether it's us or University of Chicago or Northwestern or Iowa or Michigan or wherever, we're all kind of acting under these auspices now. And so the big question is really, what is going to happen? And I think on campus, we invited two of our distinguished alums back onto our campus, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul and also Lieutenant Governor Stratton. And both of them made it very clear that the state of Illinois is looking into some of these and all the other announcements coming out of the White House, and they're determined to keep Illinois a diverse, welcoming, inclusive state. And they were very strongly supportive of the work that we do at DePaul, and that the institution is committed to treating all people with dignity and respect, as befits our namesake, St. Vincent de Paul.
Well, diversity, equity, and inclusion is what DEI is all about. And Katie Hogan, who is one of the producers of the show and comes on pretty regularly, turned me on to some information yesterday where the Department of Defense is cleaning up their website, and they are removing 26,000 pictures of people of color and women. And that's been going on everywhere. I mean, they're going after a lot of stuff. How is I know that the faculty's probably been pretty good at DePaul and would love to see Illinois really stand up to this. What's your sense of the administration at DePaul? Are they standing tall, or maybe not quite? And can you talk about that or not?
I think the administration so far is almost as in the dark as a lot of the faculty and staff and students. But there's a sense that at DePaul, we had presentations from our Office of the Mission and Mission and Values. We're a Catholic Vincentian institution, and St. Vincent de Paul himself, back in France hundreds of years ago, was ministering to the poor and the indigent, and and giving out alms and resources to the very poorest people in society, when that kind of thing was frowned upon and was even in some instances illegal. And so that kind of service to communities around the city is baked into our institution's very identity and its very mission. So I was joking to a colleague of mine, we're getting these letters from Trump, the Trump administration, and we have St. Vincent de Paul is setting our agenda. And the question is, what is the higher calling? I like to sort of go with St. Vincent de Paul on that one. So I think we're having a lot of meetings. We're having a lot of Know Your Right sessions. We're discussing having a film series about how do we understand the present moment in the United States. I've heard from friends and colleagues who have seen their federal grants frozen, for example. I was talking to a colleague who was working with to improve health access in some of Chicago's most underserved and poorest neighborhoods, and that their federal funding was suspended. And I think a lot of people have questions about if this is going to hit us, when it's going to hit us, how it's going to hit us.
I would be curious to know about where the Catholic Church is on all things. I mean, we know that the Pope has been a pretty progressive person, and we also know that there are people who don't like the Pope so much and are in the church. And, we have a couple of universities, well, a number of them around Chicagoland that are Catholic, including DePaul and Loyola. And I'm just wondering, are there I just kind of wonder where the church is at on things. And if you have any indication of, even though DePaul may be standing up, how other Catholic groups might be responding to all of this.
I don't know how the church is responding. Obviously, there was, I know from the news that there was a statement from Pope Francis that challenged some of J.D. Vance's interpretations of theology recently. But some of the most prominent pushback so far has been from Georgetown Law School. Obviously, Georgetown is a Jesuit Catholic institution, and their dean of the law school had a letter pushing back because they had been told by the Trump administration that no Georgetown law student no graduate of Georgetown Law School would be employed by the federal government while Georgetown still has DEI on its curriculum and works with recognition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I encourage people to Google and look up that letter from the dean of Georgetown Law School, which was a very forceful pushback against the Trump administration and a strong statement of commitment to the values of Catholic education. So I think, there's a tradition in Catholic education of recognizing the dignity of every individual, working with individuals as a sort of what we would call DePaul servant leadership. And I think that is very strong. And I do know that many of our president here at DePaul University, President Manuel, has told us that many of the Catholic universities around the United States their leadership are talking with each other about how to handle this current moment. I mean, technically, we are a religious nonprofit, and one of the arguments is that the speech of the university is the free speech of a religious institution. And therefore, if the university chooses to engage in practices and policies, that can be anything, such as a scholarship for, excellence in African-American studies. Does that fall under this type of letter? And so I think people they have questions, but the sentiment I get is a lot of people are committed to what we have been doing at DePaul throughout, my career here, 20 or so years, and will continue to do that.
Euan Hague, do you have any sense of other universities in Chicago and Chicagoland, like Northwestern and Illinois Wesleyan got called out by the government over DEI questions? We know that there were demonstrations at the University of Chicago, and actually this week, because we've had a student at Columbia, or a recent graduate at Columbia University in New York, got picked up by ICE. He's now in Louisiana. He has a wife who's an American citizen. There's a baby on the way. All he did was participate in a demonstration, and he has rights of free speech. But people are reacting to that. And up at Northwestern, there's been some criticism of the president there, who is Jewish, I believe, over the Trump administration saying they aren't doing enough to fight anti-Semitism on the campus. I'm not sure about other schools. I'm not sure what Loyola is doing. What message does it send that Trump administration has cut off $400 million from Columbia University and arrested a recent graduate of Columbia over participating in a demonstration.
I mean, this is obviously very concerning. The fact that pretty much all universities, all higher education in the United States relies on federal money, even if it's just something like student loans. Technically, that is federally funded student loans. And I know the administration has claimed that they're not going to target individuals, but obviously the example you've given is that of an individual. The other thing people are worried about is research grants, National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation. I have a colleague here at DePaul who just completed a project that was funded by NASA, using satellite data to look at sort of environmental impacts. And there's a sort of concern about, a lot of these funds being cut off will really, really constrain what a university can do and what we can do as faculty and professionals. Obviously, the arrest of this individual, I don't know the full details, but it sends a chilling message that a legal permanent resident of the United States can be arrested for their protest. We obviously at DePaul, as many people know, had a situation with a encampment about a year ago on our campus that was a response to the situation in Israel, Gaza. And so there are concerns about these things, and there are concerns about academic freedom, the freedom to teach and say what you want on campus, the ability of free inquiry, all these things. We're discussing these in a way that I think that we probably haven't discussed them for a decade. And I think it's really important that we as an institution, as faculty, staff, and students have a strong sense of our commitment to each other and our institution and to academic freedom and to what that means.
You're from Scotland, and you get to visit back home every once in a while, as well as take students to Europe. You're a well-traveled person. You're on top of a lot of things. I'm wondering if you can share anything you're hearing from your homeland and what's the response of people in Scotland and Europe in general might be.
So one of the things from talking with family and friends in Scotland and the UK is they get the headlines. They get all the headlines. They get the Trump headlines. They obviously saw the Trump-Zelensky Ukraine incident in the Oval Office last week, and they get all the headlines. And I think one of the things that they don't necessarily get is the nuance of some state-by-state reactions. So you'll get the headline, Trump is doing this, or the U.S. is doing this, but they don't necessarily know that 19 states have brought a lawsuit against that. They don't necessarily know that 20 states have refused to follow that direction. You don't get that kind of federalism isn't really communicated necessarily well. For example, there'll be the headlines about Trump cracking down on immigration, but then if we look at what happened recently, our Mayor Brandon Johnson and mayors of other cities were in Capitol Hill explaining their reaction to the immigration efforts from the federal government. And so quite often the kind of city by city, state by state reaction doesn't get as much coverage. And so I think there's maybe less recognition of how things are actually playing out on the ground than the headline level. The headline level is what carries the story in the UK. And normally it's kind of like, I sent the Dear Colleague letter we started the show discussing. I sent it to my father, and he says, well, wait a minute, does this mean you can't discuss slavery? Which is kind of that was his reaction to this letter when he read it through, is like, well, that would mean that's that is off the table, I get. And it's just, so I think it's that kind of level of detail. They wouldn't necessarily, unless you follow American politics really in detail, you wouldn't necessarily see all these executive orders or this letter or this statement to this audience. So I think they get the big headlines, but the drill down is maybe not, because they have other issues. And I think one of the things that we've seen this last week, of course, is Europe's commitment to Ukraine and the sort of efforts from President Macron, Prime Minister Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. How are we going to react to a world where the United States is no longer the number one ally of Western Europe? And I think that's really interesting. You mentioned I travel with students. I take students every year to Brussels in Belgium, where we go to meet with representatives of the European Union and NATO. We go to NATO's big headquarters on the outskirts of Brussels. And last year, March of 2024, we went and we met with the American representative. There was a lot of discussion of America's policies towards Ukraine, a lot of discussion about Russian disinformation and, America's commitment to NATO and building a stronger alliance. I'm due to go to NATO again in 2 weeks' time, I hope. And it'd be really interesting to see how and if the presentation that we share with students has changed. So I think that's one of the things. And so I'm talking right now with my students in my class about shifting alliances, the role of NATO, the United States seeming to be less committed to NATO. One of the things we talked about a lot recently, of course, is Trump's supposed plan to acquire Greenland. But Greenland is connected to Denmark, and Denmark is part of NATO. So Greenland is part of NATO already. There's American bases on Greenland, and it's sort of the question is, what is the commitments to these global alliances, which makes for a hard lecture to write because they seem to be changing day by day, but for a good classroom discussion. I think it's a good question as well. You mentioned my previous work on neo-Confederates or pro-Confederate activism. I actually wrote a piece.
That was my next question was that you had a great book when we first met called the Neo-Confederacy. And it was about an organization that's actually based in Rockford, Illinois. And why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because we have seen the rise of the right, and we knew that there were white supremacists, and we knew that there were latent fascists. We didn't quite know that we would see the situation turn out the way it has, with Trump being in the White House again and pushing really pretty right-wing policies. Why don't you talk a little bit about that book and where that leads us?
Yeah, so that book was published in 2008, and the organizations were not based in Rockford, Illinois, but there was a magazine that came out of Rockford, Illinois called Chronicles, where a lot of these right-wing thinkers had pieces about contemporary politics. I think the through line is really interesting. So firstly, in 2017, I think for the 10 years after the book was published, I wrote a piece called, when Trump was first elected, I wrote a piece called Making America Confederate Again, which was very much what Trump was what I thought Trump was doing at the time. And a lot of the ideas that kind of have come into contemporary Trumpism, I first read about on these right-wing pro-Confederate websites in the 1990s. I think a second thing that's really interesting, and I encourage your listeners to go and find these connections themselves. And I think they were recently detailed in media like USA Today, but the new Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, is affiliated with the religious movement led by a guy called Doug Wilson out of Moscow, Idaho. And Doug Wilson previously was very much involved. He wrote a book called Southern Slavery as It Was, which was kind of an apology for slavery and was very much part of the pro-Confederate literature that came about in the 1990s. So I don't know if you want to play 76 degrees of separation, but there's certainly voices in this administration that are familiar with the arguments about race, ethnicity, gender, religion, and so forth that were made by those kind of pro-Confederate, very, very fringe organizations in the 1990s. And now, 30 years later, they're connected in to the very highest echelons of power in the United States.
Let's go back to campus. And one of the things I always like about DePaul and teaching there is it's a real diverse community. We have people from around the world, people of all different nationalities, religions. And I wonder, I know that the DEI can't be used any longer in admissions, that kind of thing. How does that affect us at DePaul and other universities around that you may know of?
Oh, I don't deal directly with admissions. We just obviously see the incoming class as students, but I think Chicago as a diverse area is a place where we're going to get a diversity of students, and I think our university remains committed to representing society as a whole. And that's what I believe our admissions team works to bring in a representative of our whole Chicagoland area into the incoming class. So once the students are there, it's great to see them in our classrooms, and we have some really good, as you know, some really good conversations about these issues and the times that we're facing.
Well, we'll be talking more, Euan. It's always a great pleasure to have you on the show. It's always a good pleasure to see you in the neighborhood. I've really enjoyed teaching with you, and I want to thank you for coming on. I also want to thank our guest, Don Rose, today. Pretty heavy stuff we're talking about here with the current administration in Washington. And I want to, next week, we're going to get into transgender issues that are being under attack all the time now. We'll have Adam James back on, and we have a lot of great guests coming up. So with all that said, I want to encourage you all to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that we do. Together we can make a real difference, and we got to do it. All power to the people. See you next week. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21, or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM, or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpenradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing